Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Mark Bronson, President of the Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners, which may be referred to during this meeting or in our publications as TBCE or simply the board. And I call this meeting to order. The date is March 11th, 2021, and the time is 9:01 a.m. The Board Secretary, Dr. Scott Wofford, will call the roll.
Dr. Mark Bronson.
Here.
Dr. Michael Henry.
Here.
Here. Dr. Nicholas Baucom.
Here.
Dr. Mindy Neal.
Here.
Dr. Deborah White.
Here.
Mr. Gus Ramirez. Miss Ebony Todd.
Present.
Mr. Brandon Allen. All right, Dr. Bronson, all present except for Gus Ramirez and Mr. Brandon Allen.
Okay, thank you. Let's give them one more second, just in case they were self-muted, to say that they were here.
Dr. Bronson, I believe Nikel is still working with Mr. Ramirez to get past some technical issues.
Okay, we'll proceed with, I believe that we have 7 board members present. Is that correct, Dr. Wofford?
Yes, we have 7 present.
Okay, we're a 9-member board with 7 present, and therefore we have a quorum. When those board members do come on, please make sure that they are announced into the meeting. So this meeting is being conducted via GoToWebinar video conferencing software. This is an open meeting accessible to anyone who might register simply by clicking on the link provided in our public announcement and following the instructions in the return email. A recording of the meeting will be available on the board's YouTube channel shortly after the meeting's conclusion. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of the board and agency staff. It's great to see you all again. Board member discussion should be entirely on screen through this program. Any incoming chats that we might receive will go directly to our general counsel, so you do not need to bother with that feature during the meeting. Welcome licensees, representatives, members of the public, and any other guests that we may have present. I do see a couple, or at least I did before I opened the meeting. And although I reserve the right to alter the order of the agenda, I anticipate keeping the sequence as it is posted. Public comments will be heard during agenda item number 6, immediately following our committee and staff reports, except for comments which relate to items scheduled elsewhere on this agenda. When we get to agenda item 6, which is the time for public comments, I may ask some of you to clarify the nature of your comment, so I can either call on you to speak then or when we reach the corresponding topic on the agenda. Agenda item number 2 calls for discussion and action to approve the minutes for the board meeting held on November 19th, 2020. Has any board member not received and reviewed these minutes, and does any board member require discussion? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes for the board meeting held on November 19th, 2020.
I'll make the motion. Neal.
And if you, thank you, Dr. Neal. Move to approve the minutes of November 19th, 2020.
Seconded by Dr. Henry.
Dr. Henry seconded. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Motion carries to approve those board meeting minutes.
Dr. Bronson,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to note that member Allen has logged into the meeting.
Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Allen. Glad you're here. We now
Thank you,
have,
Dr. Bronson.
we now have 8 out of 9 board members present. remaining with a quorum. So, President's report. Board members, before I report events to you, I'd like to acknowledge some individual efforts. Mr. Fortner, thank you for keeping me and the other board members informed of our filings and responses and appearances to the legislature, and for keeping the governor's office abreast of our operations. Mr. Burnett, thank you for keeping us responsive and proactive on the legal front. Ms. Herzenberg and Ms. Matthews for maintaining daily operations under the hardships imposed by the pandemic and the week-long freeze with loss of power and water in your home offices. I know that was horrible. Ms. Rodriguez and your investigative staff for organizing presentations to the Enforcement Committee. I thank our CE providers for teaching our licensees what's important for the efficient practice of chiropractic. I thank our licensees for keeping current with CEs and renewals, and for your thoughtful inquiries and for your respectful communication. Board members, I thank you for bringing your insights and expertise to the table. Committee chairs for your thoughtful involvement in clarifying our rules, considering educational opportunities, facilitating a path to licensure, and of course the often burdensome task of assessing enforcement issues. Next, I want to take liberties in addressing you on a personal level. The burden of grief for me and my family has been rather extreme lately, as you all know, but the expression of love and support from many of you have warmed our hearts and helped to mend our broken hearts. And I want to thank each of you who sent condolences. Your flowers, your cards, your text messages all reminded my family and me that we're not alone in this, and you've been so incredibly kind, and I appreciate you. And the circle of life has a beginning as well. One board member among us has an addition to the family. Lila Marie Henry was born January 13th, 2021. Congratulations to Dr. and Mrs. Henry.
Thank you, guys. And thank you to the board for the lovely card you guys sent.
Events since the last board meeting. On January 29th, 2021, a date that will go down in history, Chief Justice Nathan Hecht of the Supreme Court of Texas, regarding case number 18-1223, Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners, Patrick Fortner in his official capacity as the board's executive director, and Texas Chiropractic Association petitioners versus the Texas Medical Association, the respondent, delivered the opinion of the court that, quote, the challenged rules read in context do not exceed the statutory scope of chiropractic practice. We reversed that part of the Court of Appeals judgment, declaring the rules invalid, and rendered judgment that they are valid. The decision was based on the Supreme Court's assertion that the appeals court, quote, applied an incorrect standard of review, end quote. Chief Justice Hecht said, and I quote, applying the proper standard of review, we conclude that TMA has not carried its burden of demonstrating that the challenged provisions of Rule 78.1 contravene the specific text or the objectives of the Act. Accordingly, we reverse the judgment of the Court of Appeals in part and render judgment declaring that the challenged provisions are valid. Our representative in the case, Ari Kunin of the Office of Solicitor General, notified us of our, quote, total victory at 9:31 a.m. on that glorious Friday. On behalf of the Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners, I extend our sincere thanks and appreciation to Chief Justice Hecht and the participating justices for reviewing and properly affirming the validity of challenged provisions in the board's rules, which, as the court indicated, that in context do not exceed the statutory scope of chiropractic practice. Thank you, Supreme Court of Texas, for recognizing that the board's rules do not contravene specific language in the Act or run counter to the Act's objectives. and in fact, carefully observe the statutory boundary between the medical and chiropractic professions. Your review preserves the essence of chiropractic, and without the neurological component would be dismantled. Our licensees, serving as portal of entry healthcare providers, can fulfill their duty to perform a differential diagnosis using appropriate tools and methods. The board, now free of the encumbrance of this lawsuit, can achieve better efficiency in fulfilling its regulatory mission. Meanwhile, I've been actively involved in the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners and the Federation of Chiropractic Licensing Boards, as I'll mention here in a moment. I've completed several assignments as a member of FCLB's PACE review team, which reviews CE provider applications and conducts course audits. Future events coming up on March 17th. Part of my FCLB duties, just to keep you informed, I am on the Finance and Audit Committee via a Zoom meeting. On April 22nd of this year, FCLB is hosting an open forum via Zoom for resolution authors and the Resolution and Bylaws Committee to address comments and any revisions. I will attend that meeting and answer questions about the Nerves in Chiropractic resolution, which I authored and read to you last year. I was recently notified that the committee approved the current draft unanimously. On May 1st, the FCLB Annual Congress and Educational Seminar for Regulators, originally scheduled for April 29th through May 2nd in person, has been reformatted to an online event on that Saturday only. I will attend as the delegate, and Dr. Wofford will attend as our alternate delegate. Then on May 14th through the 16th, National Board Part 4 exams will be held at Parker University in Dallas. I will again serve as chief examiner, while Dr. Wofford and Dr. Baucom have volunteered and will serve as examiners. As always, our participation is at no expense to the agency. Board members who participate and receive payment for services must report this income on their personal financial disclosure statement for next year as an exception to the honorarium prohibition. In June 2021, I don't recall the date exactly, but the National Board Part 4 Test Committee will meet in Greeley, Colorado, and I have nominated Dr. Nick Baucom to represent us on that committee. Thank you, Dr. Baucom, for your service. And that is the end of my president's reports. This moves us to agenda item number 4, board committee reports. The first would be the Rules Committee, and our chairman of the Rules Committee, as you know, is Dr. Michael Henry. Dr. Henry, other than items listed in today's agenda, do you have a report?
I do. It's going to be short. I just wanted to kind of update everyone that as we finally kind of come to the close of our major rules overhaul, the pace of rule change is going to drop drastically. This would be the time when we're going to start taking on rules on an as needed basis, or if committee members have specific rules they'd like to have reviewed or suggested, we're going to have more bandwidth to do that in the future. Mr. Burnett has just driven this ship very, very well throughout this whole rules overhaul, and we still have some fine tuning to do, and you'll be seeing those coming up, but not 20 at a time. It'll be more like 3 or 4 at a time, and I'm looking forward to really just improving that. But if you have input, if you have suggestions or questions, send it to the committee. We're available at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Henry? Our chairman of the Enforcement Committee is Dr. Nicholas Baucom. Dr. Baucom, other than items listed in today's agenda, do you have a report?
Yes, I do have just a short one. We've been relatively quiet in enforcement since our last meeting. We do have informal conferences set for next Wednesday, the 17th in Austin. And then our next EC review will be done on the 24th via Zoom. And then other than that, I don't really have a whole lot. I do have something that I did want to bring up. This is just a recent development, and it has to do with our Houston issues and not having anybody there. Scott Parker reached out to me last week and expressed his interest in possibly doing something on a contract basis with us to help enforcement clear some of those cases and lighten the load for Norma. And so I wanted to bring it up for discussion to the board. I myself am 100% excited about it because Houston's been a real thorn in our side, but I wanted to get everybody else's thoughts on that possibility.
Norma, do you have any input on that?
For who?
I was just asking if Norma had any thoughts on that.
I would be thrilled. You know, he's a wealth of experience and could be up and running almost immediately.
Yeah, having worked with Scott Parker, I would think this would be a great option for us.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. The call kind of came out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it, but you know, Houston's just, it's been a problem for us, you know, and I know, and it's at no fault of the board or staff or anything. You know, we've made hirings and they just haven't worked out, and it's just been kind of this one long drawn out thing. I also think that the way that meetings have gone more to digital and Zoom. He's in Austin now, and he'll soon be based out of Seguin. Seguin to Houston is only 2 hours, you know, so if there's investigations that need to be done in person, I don't think that that's an issue. And at least we can start getting to some of the bigger stuff. And I think it would look, especially with legislative going on, I don't want it to turn into a problem that we're not covering, you know, a third of the state's population or more.
Would that allow us to shift more resources toward the Dallas area, which I know that's our biggest number of cases right now?
You know, I don't think it's a measure of shifting cases because we have so many across the state now. So it would just be sharing the caseloads.
Okay, anybody else have any questions or concerns about the issue?
I don't think we need to take any action other than directing staff to move forward with that. Is that correct, Dr. Bronson?
That is correct. So everything sounds like a go. Then with Mr. Parker, I certainly appreciate his offer to step
Dr.
up.
Bronson,
Yes.
I hate to be the fly in the punch bowl here.
Oh, no worries. I expect that of
The
you.
decision about hiring employees, that's not really within the board's purview. That resides with the executive director. Not suggesting Patrick is going to disagree, but making decisions like that statutorily belong to him, not to you all.
The board would
you.
like to recommend that Patrick consider this option.
There you go.
Board is recommending that Patrick Fortner, our executive director, consider this as an option. So yes, thank you for the clarification on that.
That's the end of my report as well. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Baucom. So Dr. Deborah White, as chair of the Education Standards Committee, do you have a report to offer?
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. I do indeed, and that has been sent to y'all just in the last 15 minutes. So I just want to reiterate some committee discussions that we've been having about DMEs, about online jurisprudence course and the examination, the allowance of virtual board attendance for CEUs, and proceeding with course approval given our Texas Supreme Court victory. So I listed those as discussion items, as well as 2 courses that we gave full approval for that Jennifer sent us. And I do want to thank our committee members, Dr. Neal and Dr. Henry, for their expeditious opinions and guidance, and for Jennifer for all that she does for our committee in relaying information. And to just say that as not only a field chiropractor, but as the chairman of this committee, I want to thank all those that were participating in the victory that we had with the Texas Supreme Court, including all of our EDs that have been here since for the last 10 years, as well as our board presidents. And thank you, Dr. Bronson and Mr. Fortner, as well as all the help that we received from TCA for that as well. And this, for the first time in 10 plus years, I feel like chiropractors can wake up and not have to worry about whether our profession is going to be extinct or whether our practices have any value. So thank you so much for all of those involved. There's just a plethora of people to congratulate and to thank. So all those that were involved, thank you very much for our profession. It's such a monumental decision that will have generational implications to keep our Texas citizens safe. Thank you. I'm concluded.
Thank you, Dr. White. Very thoughtful remarks. I appreciate you for that. Licensing Committee, Ms. Ebony Todd, JD, Doctor of Jurisprudence, as Chair of the Licensing Committee. Other than items listed in today's agenda, do you have a report to offer?
No, sir, I do not. I want to thank the licensing staff that make my job very easy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We move to agenda item number 5, the Executive Director and staff reports. So, Mr. Patrick Fortner, before I give you the floor, just accept my apology for wording what I said just a minute ago improperly. Yes, it is your prerogative and your job to hire and fire, and I leave that entirely with you, sir. So you have the floor and our attention as well.
Thank you, Dr. Bronson, members. Jumping right in, this past week, as you probably know, I testified before both the Senate Finance Committees as well as the House Appropriations Subcommittee that is tasked with Articles 6, 7, and 8. We, of course, are in Article 8, regulatory. Because of the brevity of those hearings, I kept my topics completely focused on our exceptional items that we are requesting. First and foremost is our request that we receive back part of the 5% cuts that we made related to being able to hire an investigator in the Houston area. In my comments, I talked about the number of days that we are seeing the case loads, the average close times going up. Mentioned that roughly 27–28% of our current caseload is located in that Houston region specifically. I also mentioned that another regulatory agency recently had a position posted where they listed it as a sergeant. The experience level was comparable to the experience that both of our staff investigators have, both Norma and James. Their average salary, as you may recall, is around $58,000. And that other regulatory agency had that sergeant position listed as a starting salary of $65,000 in the Houston area. And the members, particularly in the House Appropriations Subcommittee, they seemed very interested in that. This past week, actually early this week, I also received a number of questions from our LBB analyst, specifically about the Houston position, our performance measures, et cetera. The other two exceptional items that I discussed, one is our impending move to the George Herbert Walker Bush building, and that TFC had informed us that because we're not going to be able to allow to have server space in the building, that we're going to have to move to the state data center, and that of course has expenses for subscription fees and whatnot. And that exceptional item is $15,000 each fiscal year. And then the third and last exceptional item, directly related to moving expenses, new furnishings, et cetera, for the George Herbert Walker Bush building. And we're projected to move into that building sometime in the first half of calendar year 2022. So a little more than a year from now. Now, a development also this week related to one of those exceptional items, received an email from the Health Professions Council that their discussions with Texas Facilities Commission have resulted in TFC relenting and saying, okay, yes, you can have a server room. Because of that, we are now in discussions with our database provider to move us from the cloud-based version of our database to a local server-based version, which of course would mean we end up saving that money because we won't be on the state data center, we'll be on our own server as we are right now. So very, very encouraged by that. Now, also related to our database project, a few issues have come up. The most concerning, frankly, is directly related to the state data center. The network latency, aka the network speed, going to the Amazon cloud, which is located in San Diego apparently, is very, very slow. Obviously, if we have our own server, that issue goes away completely. If we end up staying on a cloud, they are now talking about moving us to a cloud server based somewhere in Texas. So hopefully that network latency issue would go away. Now, all that being said, my hope is that we do end up with server space in the building and can move to that particular, that option, saving the money, but also having our server in our own building where if something goes wrong, we're Johnny on the spot and able to take care of it. The other issue related to the database project is, as you may recall, we converted from FileMaker Pro 5 to FileMaker Pro 19, which was the most recent version that we were able to purchase through the state contracts. There were some tables that got garbled up a bit in that translation. They had to do a double up conversion. They had to go about halfway up, and then they had to go halfway up from there to convert all the data from the old version into a version that the new software will read. Nikel has indicated, because of his expertise as a programmer and the fact that nobody knows our database better, Nikel has indicated that he is going to be able to fix those issues. And once we get all of those issues, then we'll be able to enter into a testing state and eventually, yay, finally get through the tunnel and see sunlight at last of us using that new database. Anybody have any questions about all of that before I move into a staff item?
I'm just kind of curious on the new database, and this may be more of a Sarah and Jennifer question, but the new capabilities that we're going to have, what does that look like for our licensees as well as our board staff? Is that going to create some efficiencies for you guys, or is this just to try to keep up at this point?
Hi, Dr. Henry. Thank you for your question. This is the same database that we're currently using, just a newer version. So it doesn't really create any efficiencies. It just gets us to a place where it may give us more securities that the auditor's office has asked us to do. But as far as efficiencies, I I haven't really tested any of the data, but from what I understand, it's the same database, just a newer version.
Okay, that's why I was curious. I just didn't know. I know this has been a big item that we've been trying to take care of, so I wasn't sure if we were gonna be able to make something work better for you or just keep you functioning the way we are right now, which y'all are doing a great job. So thank you.
Yeah, as you may recall, my biggest concern about the database as it exists right now is because it is so old. I mean, it is 20th century technology, came out in the 90s. That particular version, every time Windows sends us an update, we are collectively holding our breath to make sure that, you know, hoping and praying that we can still access our data once that Windows update occurs. So given that we'll be moving to a version that is 20 some odd years newer, that fear will be greatly diminished, and that takes a huge weight off of my mind. Plus the additional reporting and other aspects of the newest version of that software. It's going to make it may not create any new efficiencies on the licensing side, but I know on the reporting side and the data tracking, it will make things a lot easier.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the database or the testimony before the legislature? Okay, all right. I actually asked Norma to come in here, Norma Rodriguez, our lead investigator. Norma has been with the agency for 5 years, a little bit more. And in recognition of her dedicated service to the Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners in the state of Texas, we are presenting Norma with this lovely item. And I'd like her to come over here so I can give it to her personally. There you go. Norma, thank you so much. We appreciate your service.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
And unless anybody has any other questions about any other items, that concludes my report. And I would cede the floor to Jennifer Herzenberg, Director of Operations.
Hi, board members. Good morning. Attached in your packet is a financial report taking us into the second quarter of the fiscal year. We are on track with our expenditures and our revenues. And we got news from the comptroller's office this past week that due to our frugal spending in 2020, the amount of money that we lapsed included the whole 5%. So we don't have to make any additional cuts towards that 5% in this fiscal year. So that was good news for our agency, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the report.
Jennifer, I have a question in general. Is there any way that you can tabulate, maybe for our next meeting, how much has been saved specifically due to our virtual meetings?
Yes, I can get you some information. The biggest savings, of course, is the travel. Not having everybody come into Austin, we save a lot on the hotels and the rental vehicles, but I can get you an average of some information that we spent in 2019 and what we're spending currently on those travel expenses.
Thank you.
Patrick, you have something?
Yeah, I should have mentioned this during my report because it is directly related to the remote meetings. I actually have, there are some members of the legislature who have filed bills to allow agencies to continue to have remote meetings. Most of the bills have a carve out saying that you will have a meeting in person at least one time per year. I would tell you as a small agency, every dollar is incredibly important when you're as small as we are. So if we ended up moving to remote meetings and then coming to Austin 1 or 2 times a year as opposed to 4 times or more a year, the impact on our budget would be appreciable.
Would you be able to redirect those funds, or would that be clawed back to the state if we don't spend it?
I don't anticipate they would do a clawback because they don't give us money that's earmarked for travel. we do that through our own internal budgeting process. Now, there are some pots of money that they give to us, and I don't anticipate there would be a clawback. We can move between those different strategies.
Yeah, I definitely see the value of doing the remote and combined with a couple of in-person meetings instead of all of them in person. I'm sure that the rest of the board members appreciate that, especially enforcement, for not having to take 2 days out of practices, or at least not
Absolutely.
as much time. Yeah.
And also, I neglected to echo Dr. Bronson's comments. The staff has just worked wonderfully during this whole pandemic. Our office manager, Lisa Agarwal, has kept things running and humming. Nikel has kept our systems running, and also additional kudos to Joe. As you probably may or may not know, Joe has been physically present in the building every day throughout the entire pandemic. Part of that is because he doesn't like to work remotely, but having him here, for mail and to transfer calls, plus on top of his other casework, like I said, I can't be complimentary enough about every person on staff definitely jumping in, doing their part, plus anything else that we've needed.
You got a good team there.
Dr. Bronson, could I interject something for a moment?
Yes, please.
Relative to compliments, it reminds me, I was privileged to virtually attend the 4-hour TBCE board presentation by Dr. Montgomery. And for Dr. Bronson and Patrick and Mr. Burnett and for Joe, you may have noticed that you've gotten a lot, and Dr. Henry, of course, you may have noticed that you've gotten some thank you notes in your mail recently, and that would be due to Dr. Montgomery. He actually mentioned you specifically, told each member who was attending to be sure and write you all thank you notes relative to the new boards. So the new rules that you've put out. So just wanted to let you know where the origin of that came from. And to also thank Mr. Burnett too for all of his help on our committee with his all of his intellectual sharings, put it that way.
Of course. We appreciate Mr. Burnett. We appreciate Joe McLaughlin, Lisa Agarwal. There's some names that I didn't mention specifically a while ago, but certainly worthy of our gratitude. And now for Dr. Montgomery, he's to blame for our inboxes, right?
That's right.
All right. Where are we, Mr. Fortner?
If Ms. Herzenberg is concluded, that transitions us to our licensing report.
Good morning, members. The licensing dashboard compares the first quarters of fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021. I did want to mention that I made a typo for the CE applications approved and posted. For fiscal year 2020, it says the number is 25. It was actually 275. So I just wanted to point that out. And I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
My only question is on the DC renewals. Is that still just due to when we switched to the 2-year, that it was all kind of at once, and so that's going to be a very slow process to kind of spread those out between the 2 years? We're going to always see that large influx.
We're going to continue to see that trend.
Okay. Is that causing a problem on y'all's end, having all that volume at once? I mean, I guess there's nothing we can do about it, so it doesn't really matter. But
it means 1 year is a little bit busier than the next, but we can play a little bit of catch up if needed. Okay, well, that concludes my report.
And last but not least, Director of Enforcement.
Good morning. Board members, you've received my report. I would just like to highlight that we have a total of 43 cases that have been closed since September 1st, 2020, with a case closure time of 385 days. We currently have 173 ongoing investigations. 25 cases have been closed since the last board meeting. The upcoming informal conference will present 6 cases, and at the upcoming enforcement committee review will be 26 cases. Any questions for me?
Do you feel like we are doing okay on keeping up, considering with, I know the pandemic issues have caused a problem with investigation, but are you feeling like we're coming back from that, or is that still really keeping things slower than they normally would be?
You know, we've had an increase in cases since the pandemic, mostly due to sanitation and mask concerns. So that's added to our case list. But we are doing the cases as quickly and efficiently as we can right now, sir.
I would say I'd like to interject, Norma. I'm telling you guys do an amazing job. It's especially during the COVID crisis. We communicate so regularly about cases, you know, Dr. Balkum and I and Norma. It's what they're doing is just second to none, and I just want to commend you for all that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
If I could interject, Norma, related to COVID complaints and whatnot, as you know, yesterday, the removal of the statewide mask mandate went into effect. With that and the additional guidance that we've given to our licensees on our webpage, which I'm not going to expound on, the statement is what the statement is. I would say that we have to trust our licensees as the portal of entry providers that they are. And if complainants file complaints with us related to COVID issues, unless it is something that is just egregious and goes vastly beyond statement that is on our website right now and the official position of the board, I have instructed Norma to close those cases and refer the complainants to their local health jurisdictions.
This is a topic and a discussion item on the agenda also, and we can talk about that more there. Okay, Mr. Fortner, does that conclude your report and your staff?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Agenda item number 6. The board will now entertain general comments from the public on matters not specifically announced elsewhere in this agenda. I invite any of our registered guests to speak to the board. Your comments are important to us, so please don't hesitate to share your concerns with us today. Just click on the icon to raise your hand, and I'll unmute your microphone and call your name. And of course, if the length of your presentation might delay the meeting, I'll let you know and give you a chance to wrap it up. I won't just eject you from the meeting or anything inappropriate like that. Let me go to our list of attendees now and check for hands raised. And we have, by the way, board members, we do have 10 attendees, a couple of former board members. We have legal representatives and representatives from state associations and individuals. And I'm going to start at the top. And this is Amy Gonzalez, DC, former board member. And Amy, before I unmute you, I will say that it's great to have you here and see you again in this forum, and that if you want to discuss something about the massage therapy topic, that is an agenda item, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. But let me see if I can. Oh, you're self-muted. There you go. Welcome.
Hi, Dr. Bronson. I'm happy to discuss this topic right now if you like, or I can wait until y'all get to that agenda item here in a couple points.
I
Whichever.
would like for you to wait until we get to the agenda item, if you don't mind, ma'am.
Absolutely.
Okay, I hope it works in your schedule, and we should be there shortly. So let's do that. And I'm going to move to Dr. Cynthia Tays, former board member and board president, and currently have involved with the FCLB. Dr. Tays, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. My comments regard to continuing education requirements, and you may want those at a later time as well.
I don't, help me out, somebody on the agenda. It's not a.
Yeah, it's item 8 on the agenda.
Item 8. Let's reserve your input for item 8 on the agenda, Dr. Tays, if that's okay with you.
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can work this and look for other hands, and I see none. So let's move on to board policy discussions. So agenda items 7 through 10 are topics which have, for various reasons, become worthy of discussion, but which do not involve any rule proposals presently. We just want to be responsive to the profession and the public on issues which have been brought to our attention. And we want this board and the public to have an opportunity to speak on these topics and to share your concerns. The board may discuss, but take no formal action on these items. The board may give direction to the staff as a result of the discussion. Agenda item 7 pertains to the board's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so here's where we can further discuss what Mr. Fortner started just a few minutes ago. As an overview, I wrote down a few notes for you. For perspective, it's only been a year and 12 days since the first suspected case of local transmission in the US, and it's been less than a year since the President of the United States declared a national emergency. To me, and I'm sure some of you agree, it seems a lot longer than that. But just to remind everyone of how responsive this board was, we posted 2 different notices to our licensees before the national emergency declaration and before the CDC warned about large gatherings. The first potential threat to the public safety from within the chiropractic profession was made known to us by chiropractors who sent us copies of ads promoting adjustments to provide immunity to the coronavirus. And we responded by advising that we would investigate anyone making such claims for 2 reasons. First, the chiropractic adjustment being a hands-on procedure, it's impossible to give an adjustment without breaching the safe distance and touching the patient. Secondly, we found no reliable evidence in the ads to support those claims, which we always would appreciate seeing. Any information distributed by a licensed healthcare professional should be based on valid and reliable information, supported by institutional research, preferably, not just an historical account published in a trade journal. But recall what I said in the May board meeting on this subject. The adjustment does not equal chiropractic care. We were careful not to use the 2 terms interchangeably, and recognizing that chiropractors are portal of entry healthcare providers with physician level responsibilities and the authority to counsel patients on general health related topics, not limited to spinal adjustments. So that's the reason that this is on the agenda as a discussion item, and I welcome any input from board members, agency staff, or the public. And I will look for hands raised from the public, but if you're a board member or staff member, feel free just to speak up. Hearing none, I'm going to specifically ask Mr. Fortner, anything that you would like to add on this topic?
No, sir, we were really fortunate when this all came up that we had recently made expenditures of buying new laptops for the agency. That was just coincidental for a couple of reasons. One, our old laptops were at the end of their operational life. And we had also set aside some budgetary funds in order to do that. That was already in the plan. Plus, another thing that was sort of serendipitous is that I had already implemented a partial work from home process for a number of our staff members. And at that point, everybody was working from home anywhere from 1 or 2 days a week, whereas some weren't working from home at all. Because of that, we already had the remote logging capability. We had our data system set up so everything was properly secured through a VPN. All of those things were already in place. So when the decision was made to move as largely remote as we did, we were already able to do that pretty quickly and on the fly, whereas some other agencies didn't have that possibility. In fact, there are a number of agencies still in the hobby building where some of their staff, they've been in person here every day for the last year. I credit the staff for their ability to make those changes on the fly, and I appreciate the fact that, to my knowledge, we haven't skipped a step. I mean, there are some things that we haven't been able to do in person, particularly on some of the on-site investigative work, but that hasn't slowed the staff's ability down to still interact on those investigations. Norma and James have still kept the case flow going. I can't be complimentary enough to the staff and the way they've responded to the pandemic.
Mr. Fortner, do you have you outlined any kind of game plan on bringing staff and operations back up to like normal in-person speed, or are you going to continue to have more remote done in the future, or what's your game plan now that we're seeing this starting to improve so dramatically?
Well, I actually had that discussion with staff last week when the governor came out with his notification of the removal of the statewide mask mandate and opening up the state. As a state agency, we are open. As I have a number of staff members who have either school-age children or older family members who reside with them, or some who might be a little more gray in the hair and long of the tooth. Until we get closer to herd immunity and until anyone who wants the vaccine is able to get the vaccine, I don't anticipate us moving back to 100% or as largely on site as we were a year ago. Now, all that being said, today, for example, we have 5 people in the office of a staff of 9, and that's not unusual. There have been in fact, there have been some times in the last year where we've had as many as 6 or 7 here. We are still maintaining social distancing. Masks are not required in the office under the governor's rule. they are encouraged when you're away from your individual workstation. I still have mine. I'm wearing it everywhere I go, even though I got my first shot yesterday. My attitude is I want the staff to be as free and open as they feel comfortable, while also strongly encouraging them to keep their other fellow staff members in mind.
Do you have a timeline in mind? Is it June, July? I mean, what are you thinking as far as trying to bring operations back in?
That's really not something I can put a timeline on for a couple of reasons. One, until we reach herd immunity, I don't know that that the governor's office is going to end the emergency declaration that's in place. As long as the emergency declaration is in place, I'm going to continue to allow staff to work remote as much as they feel comfortable doing so.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any concerns from the profession? Is there any confusion anymore? We've tried to send out emails and make announcements to clarify our position and our recommendations. And how's that going? Is anybody hearing anything regarding animosity, confusion, anything at all from the field?
No, but I'm wondering if I could ask Norma a question. The complaints that have been related to COVID, have those come from chiropractors or mainly from patients?
From patients. We've received some anonymous complaints from within the clinic's office where they're saying that perhaps the sanitizing equipment that's being used doesn't meet standards, or they've been told not to wear masks. So you've had some come from inside the clinic and then some from patients who have encountered clinics where masks weren't being adhered to.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to just reinforce our position that we license healthcare professionals and we expect professional behavior and protection of the public from our licensees. And we appreciate all those who have given the effort to do so, and just to avoid any selfish policies, but rather protect those around us as best we can. The information that we get from CDC and Department of State Health Services from Texas, some of that information changes, as you know. A lot has changed, and so we've purposely not required specific types of restrictions, but rather defer to organizations which keep abreast of this as best they can and broadcast. And but it's hard. It's hard for licensees. You factor in the you know what I'm trying to say. Exactly. And it's hard to know what's right. So that's why we defer to the best practices, best judgment of licensed healthcare professionals to keep people safe.
And I'd just like to put a final note that the board understands that situations are different in different locations, and each individual situation is going to be different, which is why we didn't want to take overreaching action. You know, the board has the duty to walk a measured line and protect the public without infringing upon the public's rights at the same time. So we do understand that if your clinic's in an area that has very low caseloads, low transmission loads, or high indications of herd immunity, it's going to be a different situation than in a major metropolitan area where cases are on the rise. And so we do ask that our licensees pay attention to those kind of things and use their best judgment whenever possible.
Thank you for adding that, Dr. Henry. Okay, so let's move to, if y'all are okay with that. Anybody else on the topic, by the way? Just want to respect you. Item number 8, discussion and possible changes to the board's continuing education requirements and recommendations for changes to the current continuing education rules. So, Dr. White, would you like to lead the discussion?
Certainly. Just to say, as a broad general statement, as a result of the Texas Supreme Court victory that we've had, we as a committee do not feel that any rules need to be changed, any language needs to be changed relative to a differential diagnosis when it comes to approving our courses. And we are really look forward to being able to actually approve maybe some more courses that we had not prior to the decision.
Okay, thank you, Dr. White. Anybody else?
I just wanted to acknowledge that the board has received, some thought out questions from licensees regarding the current continuing education requirements, and we've definitely had lots of internal discussion and consideration about those requirements. I'm on both education and rules, and at this time, I'm not recommending any change to the hour makeup based on what we're seeing. To keep the licensees abreast of what the changes are with our board, getting in there and really looking at those 4 hours that the board requires, that is not excessive in the opinion of at least the committee members I've spoken with. The other thing is that there is a variety of courses within those 4 hours, so it's not like you have to take the same 4-hour course every year and hear the same information, even though that information changes. If you want to get more abreast of billing, there's courses for that fall into the 4-hour board required courses. So just to remind the licensees is that you have a large choice on what you want to choose to take your 4 hours in. They just have to fall within that required board 4 hours.
Thanks. And I know that it's also your opinion, Dr. Henry, that during the annual required hours, they should at least include any changes made to rules within the past year, right?
Yeah, and that's something that we're trying to work with our presenters, is that if you don't want to do a complete breakdown of all of our rules, at least try to educate the people attending your courses on any changes that are going to be different than what they heard the year before. I mean, at a bare minimum, and I would suggest licensees at least every couple of years do a full update on the rules, because that does change so much, or has, especially in the last few years.
And I hope that CE providers of those 4 hours will follow the lead of one of our providers. I know Dr. Montgomery, during his presentation, he gets questions and then he brings the issues back to us for consideration. I think that you agree that's very helpful, right, Dr. Henry?
Extremely helpful from a rules committee perspective, because when there's confusion, we want to fix that. When something's ambiguous or unclear, those are the kind of fine-tuning things that we really want to take on over the next few years after our major revisions. So that feedback is incredibly valuable.
Right, because if there's any confusion among even 1 or 2 people, then there's probably confusion among more than that, and we want to know about it so that we can fix it. Christopher.
Dr. Bronson, I just wanted to mention that probably over the last 4 or 5 months, I've joined Jennifer in participating in Kathy Jones's monthly webinars and generally give a rule update. And I'm in discussions with Dr. Montgomery about his courses, about showing up and talking about whatever rule changes or whatever hot topics are on the minds of the attendees for those CEs. And I think that it's kind of part of our outreach to try to the licensee world that we're available for things like that, especially if they're done remote meetings like this one. Very easy to do. So hopefully some of the other providers will take advantage of that.
Oh, I hope so too. Okay. Anybody else on this topic? Let's move to discussion item number 9, discussion of the practice of massage therapy under a licensee's supervision. And I made some notes to introduce this topic, the reason for it being on the agenda. And so I'd like to provide a background on it, and then I'd like to hear from Christopher regarding legality, and then I'd like to hear from some of our attendees on the topic. Dr. Gonzalez wrote us a letter that was distributed to the board members, and I briefed through it. And so we'll address that. And then if Dr. Gonzalez is still on the call, then we'll hear from her directly. So as a background, here's the reason this is a discussion item. Massage therapists are licensed by the TDLR, which is structured with an advisory board, which includes licensed massage therapists, LMTs. So the LMTs on the board do not make policy, they just offer advice. In early 2020, Governor Abbott closed, quote, massage parlors as non-essential during the COVID-19 pandemic safety mandates. According to the president of the Texas Massage Therapy Association, with whom I spoke, who is also on the TDLR advisory board, LMTs were out of work unless they practiced in a doctor's office, such as a chiropractic clinic owned by a DC who was declared as essential. Some LMTs went to work under the employ of or by contract with a DC in the chiropractic clinic. The LMTs simply told their massage clients of their new location and conducted business as usual. Basically, massage practices moved into chiropractic clinics, or in some cases next door to chiropractic offices, but under the chiropractic signage. Then some DCs figured out they could save money by hiring non-licensed massage therapists to do the same thing, and they still advertised it as massage therapy and sent their patients over to their massage, quote, massage therapist. The LMTs were again out of work and expressed a grievance to their state association, prompting their president to inquire if DCs can delegate massage therapy to non-licensed people. That prompted this discussion item. And I looked up a few things before I turn this over to Christopher for legal. I just looked up ACA position. The ACA published a position statement in 1999, which describes a DC's use of CPT code 97140 for therapeutic massage. You can access that if you want to. But let's do this. Let's first hear from Christopher, and then I'm going to look at our attendee panel and see who has a hand raised. Christopher?
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. Before I start getting to the details on this, let me toss out this caveat that what I'm going to be discussing in terms of the statutes, this has nothing, what I'm going to say has nothing to do with malpractice requirements that licensees might have, or what their malpractice insurance carriers might require of them. This has nothing to do with employment law or anything like that. So for attendees that are listening to this, understand that what we're talking about is the delegation authority of a chiropractor to some other individual to perform massage therapy, and that is all. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So statutorily, chiropractors under Occupation Code Chapter 201 have the ability to delegate pretty much anything that is within the scope of practice. The things that are not, that the board has said that can't be delegated include acupuncture, VONT, the VONT testing, which was the subject of a lawsuit from, by TMA, and the and diagnosis and the prescribing of treatment. Other than that, you all are free to delegate whatever acts that are within your scope of practice to other individuals. Most recently, we adopted a rule that dealt with radiological procedures. And so somebody, you all can delegate the performance of radiological procedures. We have a rule for it. The reason we have a rule is that Occupations Code Chapter 601, which covers rad techs, specifically says that one, chiropractors as healthcare practitioners, that's the term they use in Chapter 601, are exempt from licensing requirements to perform radiological procedures. And then it further says that somebody employed by you, they can be delegated the authority to do that without requiring a license, as long as your governing board, the board, adopts a rule. Well, we did that. And so we now have 22 Texas Administrative Code Section 78.5, which says that as long as the individual that you're delegating to has some sort of documented experience and or education, and that chiropractors on site when those procedures are performed, then they're good to go. Occupations Code Chapter 455 is what deals with massage therapy, and similar to the Chapter 601 for the rad techs, it exempts chiropractors from the requirements of licensing for massage therapy. You don't have to do it. Where it differs with Chapter 601 for the rad techs is that there's no provisions in there about our board having to adopt a rule in order to allow for delegation, which is fine, and it still means that you have the authority to delegate to an individual that is not licensed as a massage therapist to perform massage therapy. So the effect's the same. The only difference, I think, really is that the rad tech statutes kind of lay out in the rad tech statute what the process is for our agency to allow for it. There's nothing like that for massage therapists. So bottom line is you can delegate. Now, what does that mean? Well, it clearly means, as in Chapter 201 or Section 201, 451, you are responsible as a licensee, as a licensed chiropractor, you are responsible for everything that person to whom you delegate specific tasks for their actions. So the liability, at least in terms of our board, lies with you. It raises a bunch of interesting questions. Joe and I have kind of batted around a few hypotheticals. It's the same thing applicable if the person that you're delegating to is that you're contracting with them and they're not your employee. Can somebody who's licensed with TDLR just simply say, well, I'm not licensed for purposes of the work I do under a chiropractor? We're not entirely sure what the answers are. We have our own ideas, but I would say this in my legal opinion, but we don't have the jurisdiction to fall back on that, is that if you are employing somebody that is licensed by TDLR as a massage therapist, you have agreed essentially to fall under TDLR's jurisdiction for purposes of that licensed individual. So I know that Dr. Bronson mentioned the effort to kind of go after quote unquote massage parlors as part of the human trafficking initiatives coming out of the governor's office and the legislature. That imposed the requirement that if you had multiple massage therapists in one location, that the facility be licensed as well. And so I know of some of our licensees that have 2 or more massage therapists on staff, and they are and they're licensed with TDLR. Therefore, they are required not to be licensed as a massage establishment. So the chiropractor is now under the jurisdiction of TDLR. So that's kind of the state of the law. And again, like I said, hiring somebody that is not licensed by TDLR as a massage therapist, I make no claims about what effect that would have on your malpractice insurance, what kind of impact that has on any employment law questions or anything like that. That is something that probably our private attorneys out there who do work for our licensees on business-related matters would be in a much better position to advise them on. So that's basically what I had to say. If anybody has any questions about that. Dr. Henry?
Yeah, I would just also like to caution anyone who might be practicing in that way is that we do have false advertising or misleading statement rules. So if you are going to delegate to someone who is not a licensed massage therapist, do not call them a licensed massage therapist or even a massage therapist. They are performing a massage therapy service in your office under your license. They are not a massage therapist. That is a misleading claim.
Correct.
So just be very careful with that if you're going to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. That actually summed up my main point. Any other board members before I'm going to call on Dr. Amy Gonzalez, attendee. Y'all ready for her? Here we go. Hang on just a second, Dr. Gonzalez. And there you go. You have the floor, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces. I miss a lot of you. I miss being on the board. I know that I couldn't do another term because I was so busy with my 5,000 children and animals and such. But I miss y'all, and it's so nice to see your faces. Norma, congratulations on your being recognized today and serving the Texas Board of Chiropractic for 5 years and putting up with all of us crazy chiropractors for so long. I talked to Christopher Burnett a couple months ago about the massage situation, and since I was a massage therapist before I was a chiropractor, and I have several massage therapists in my office, I wanted to kind of chime in because I wasn't sure where this argument was going to go, if it was going to go towards rules committee or if anything was going to be changing. I don't wish to see any changes made in that direction in regards to delegation rule because I don't really feel that it's necessary. I sent a letter that was distributed to the board members, and so hopefully you had a chance to read that. One of my examples that I use is a little bit dramatic, as I say in there, but using the example about emergency medical doctors can delegate something like a needle decompression procedure for a paramedic to do on the side of the highway. Well, chiropractors, in contrast, massage therapy is one of the most low risk modalities that we use in our office besides the actual chiropractic adjustment. So us not being able to delegate such a low risk modality, I feel like that would send a message to other professions of our qualifications to be able to handle such delegation. And I think that could be a negative negative thing against our profession, especially since we just recently had a statutory win in our profession. But I just didn't want to see any delegation changes in regards to that rule. I don't think it's necessary. I think the way that the rules are written, as Mr. Burnett highlighted, I think they're perfect just the way they are. And another issue is I would be concerned that if delegation rule change might affect the way insurance companies reimburse us as well. I know that some insurance companies don't allow delegation of certain things, but some do, and that could make things a little bit sticky as well in a busy practice. So, but that's all I had. I sent a letter as well that y'all can read in a little bit more. I go into a little bit more detail. I don't know how to not be wordy, as many of you know. So.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. It's great to hear from you. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Gonzalez?
Dr. Bronson, she did remind me something I wanted to mention on this is that one of the biggest, most far-reaching things from this new Supreme Court ruling is in no uncertain terms, it was made clear that just because one service falls under one profession's rule, such as the medical board, does not automatically exclude it from other professions. That is a really important takeaway from that Supreme Court ruling. And I just wanted to make sure that when we're writing rules, when we're interpreting policy, that all board members and staff, are on the same mindset from that, because that was well put in that ruling. I think it's going to have far-reaching effects on how we interpret and make rule in the future.
Thank you, sir. I want to go back to agenda item. Sorry, I need to go back to agenda item number 8 because I think that Dr. Cynthia Tays wanted to talk, and I didn't see another hand raised, and I just got off base there. So I'm going to unmute Dr. Cynthia Tays, and there you go, ma'am. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bronson. And I'm sorry to change the subject here because I was really enjoying the last discussion as well. I just wanted to, I'll make this brief. We made a requirement when I was on the board, in the early years I was on the board, we made a requirement that we teach the ethics and documentation. And then we added later, the next year too, excuse my memory here, that we should teach the board rules, Texas board rules. The reason for this is when I first got on the board in 2008, I was placed on enforcement and we were getting 30 complaints a month, mostly from patients. And we had 1,000 less licensees than you do now. This is a huge number. Our enforcement staff were working hard, as they always have, but it was really hard to keep up. Once we enforced the requirement for teaching the board rules, we saw this decline very rapidly. So I know that you're not talking about removing this requirement right now, but I would hope that you don't in the future. I know it's not always popular, but people can do it at home, in the comfort of their home on a webinar, and it's very easy to do, as we all know. You're having a problem with your enforcement coverage, particularly in Houston, and I'm glad to hear that Mr. Parker may be returning. But that would be even a bigger problem should, you let this requirement go. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tays. Let's move to agenda item 10, discussion of compliance with the standards of practice of the chiropractic profession by chain or franchise facilities and their licensees. And I would like to introduce this topic and how it came about in just a moment. So I'd like to introduce this topic of discussion and then hear from some of you I know Dr. Wofford will have some input as well. But the reason this is on the agenda is because I personally, as a practitioner, have heard multiple times from new patients to my practice over the past few years. And this is a quote, "I went to blank a few times, but I decided now I need to see a real chiropractor." And it concerned me that they would be getting a different service, something dramatically different at one clinic than they would be getting from here. And so while I don't intend to cause any harm to any legitimate chiropractic enterprise, but some people's experience is not what they expected or what they had hoped. And I'm just concerned that some of our licensees who work at these clinics aren't meeting standards. And I don't know exactly what they're documenting. I should. We've had stakeholder meetings on the topic, but when I compare these unsolicited comments from people who have been there to the requirements in our documentation rule, I find a disconnect. And I usually follow up on these patients' comments with a couple of questions to give me an idea of what goes on there. And so far, every one of those patients told me that there was no doctor-patient interview with the standard discussion of health history, no physical examination for the process of differential diagnosis. Their experience was completely different, in and out in 5 minutes, quote, is what they've told me. So they tell me that they go in, they hop on an adjusting table, the next available DC on duty gives them an adjustment, and they're out the door. And so I'm just asking the board to consider any potential risk to the public and impact to the profession if we don't look into this, if we don't investigate some of these practices for compliance.
I have a couple of points on this.
Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
I think that lumping this all together under chain and franchise facilities is probably not the best way to handle it, just because I know for a fact certain chains handle their things very well. There are others that don't, and individual franchise owners have a lot of control over that. The standards for these large franchises, we can actually go in and look at, and I have in the past, and the standards that they teach are generally at least conforming to board minimums. And they're not going to be the same service you're going to provide in your office, and there's a price point difference on that. But what we have to enforce is minimums that are safe. I always, and don't take this as offensive if there's anyone out there from a higher volume chain, but I think about a fast food restaurant is going to follow the same guidelines from the health department that a really high-end steakhouse is. Now, the quality of the food and the service is going to be drastically different, but it's the same health guidelines. Those are the minimums for safety. So our board's guidance is not to hold everybody up to the highest standard possible. It's to define the minimum standards for safety. And I think that enforcing on, if you get reports like that, that particular doctor or location should absolutely get a complaint filed and investigated. That doesn't mean that there's a problem with having chains or franchises, in my opinion.
Certainly, I probably disagree with you on one point regarding in our enforcement of minimum safety requirements. I don't know. I kind of see that we enforce standards of practice, which is a higher level than that. In fact, Dr. Henry, again, the Supreme Court of Texas, which just issued the recent opinion, they cited our Rule 78.1, which explains that board licensees are expected to, quote, provide necessary examination and evaluation services to differentiate a patient or condition for which chiropractic treatment is appropriate from a patient or condition that is in need of care from a medical doctor or other class of provider. And then the court added, quote, simply put, a healthcare provider cannot diagnose a problem without ruling out other potential causes of the problem. In other words, making a differential diagnosis is an unavoidable part of making a diagnosis. Virtually any problem that a chiropractor treats could potentially have a non-chiropractic source, end quote.
I agree. Let me clarify, I guess. That to me, that is a minimum standard, and that should be expected. I'll give you another anecdotal example to kind of reflect yours. There's a local franchise near me that not only do they differentiate between something that's a chiropractic problem or not, they differentiate between a chiropractic problem they can handle versus a clinic that offers more full services. So I think you may be near a bad franchise and I may be near a good one, but
Yeah.
just so you know that the standard of care, there is always supposed to be an examination. That's why we set those rules, and they are expected to follow those rules. To me, that's not a minimum. That is minimum safety. I mean, you have to do some sort of evaluation or examination to meet those minimum safety requirements.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to comment on. Yes, and some of you on this board know that I'm in the process of actually purchasing 4 of these franchises, and I spent last week in Phoenix doing 1 week of training with this, quite frankly, the joint. And, you know, quite frankly, in my perception, it stood for everything that I was against until that I have been through their training. And they last year hired a new DC that's head of their standards. And they have dramatically changed how they approach treating patients. Number one, I've been in 7 clinics now. Their minimum exam on every clinic that I went to was at least 30 minutes to differentiate. One thing that I did find out that has been set in standards by the head of the chiropractic trainings for these clinics is if a patient, for no better words, has a radiculopathy or if they have any positive orthopedic findings, they are instructed to refer out to another chiropractor, period, that they can do diagnostic testing, radiographic studies. And in the 7 clinics that I've been in, I would say the average clinic referred out no less than 2 to 3 per day to other chiropractors, which kind of gave me a really good feeling with that. Again, I went in very negatively and I walked out after the week of training going, wow. And one thing I would like to say, in the 7 clinics that I have gone through, the majority of the doctors there had been disgruntled and disenchanted with our profession. And I talked to 6 of them that had actually quit practicing because they had worked in private clinics that they felt like they were just like PI mills and whatnot, that they were just had no concern about the welfare of the patient and they were out to make money. Well, these doctors, the 6 that I'm talking about, are back in the profession. They love it. And they said, we get to treat patients and adjust them and get them well. Again, I went in very negatively in the last, and I've been researching this and working on this for 5 months. I am totally impressed with the way they are teaching and franchising now. I believe their standards are very efficient. I'm very excited that the head doctor requires that now in their statements, they're required to refer to other chiropractors, not medical doctors, other chiropractors to support the profession to determine a differential diagnosis if they don't feel they're able to treat them. So, I think Dr. Henry said something very accurate, Dr. Bronson, that they are unfortunately franchised, and probably the standard of care at certain franchises may not have met what they should. But I do know that the corporate headquarters is very active in making sure they do know to do that. And what I think we need to do as a board is make sure that these franchises are held to that standard, that what they say they're doing are their franchisees. But again, I've been enlightened, and I think that there's actually going to be a real positive being able to hire these doctors that quite frankly were down and out on the profession, and they get to go work and quite frankly make a good living.
Thank you, Dr. Wofford. Dr. Baucom.
Yeah, I wanted to add really quickly. I've talked to Dr. Wofford about this in the last week or so, just briefly. I agree with what Dr. Henry said. We've got to be careful with lumping everything together. And with as far as people that have concerns with it, with the letter that we got that's in the agenda and other people that we've heard from, I've heard it too. We've all probably had patients that have come in and had subpar experiences. I don't think that that's limited specifically to franchises, though. I've had patients that have had subpar experiences at other chiropractic offices, and the big point that I want to bring up, and I've talked to Norma at length about some of these things in the past because we've had clusters of complaints come in. But that's the thing, is that we have to be made aware of it. I think that we need to be very cautious about going out to franchises specifically and targeting them. The way that we've always worked, and when somebody calls me and says, "Hey, I've got this thing going on in another doctor's office," my response is always call the board, file a complaint, and then we can investigate it. If there's not a complaint, then we don't investigate it. And if we go out and just start wholesale investigating
Targeting.
franchises over private practices that are owned by the DC, I think we're opening up a can of worms that we're gonna, from a litigation standpoint, it's gonna be a big issue.
That being said, I would love to hear if legal or anyone from the board staff has an idea on how do we regulate the bad franchises or the bad locations that are not franchises when they're not owned by a DC. I know when we lost the facility license, that was good on a sense, but it did take some teeth out of any kind of regulation we can have, because like Dr. Bronson, I know the challenge you're going to have is that if that franchise that's near you is run by a non-DC and they're just cycling through chiropractors, well, we can definitely cite and penalize the doc whose name's on the record from that bad visit without an exam, because they should know better. If they're going to their 4 board hours, hopefully they know the rules, and if they're working somewhere where they're not complying with those rules, then they need to get out of there. But how, and is there any way that we can cite or stop those bad non-DC owned or bad DC owned practices from continuing that practice? Do we have any recourse?
Christopher?
I don't know, which sounds like a Weasley answer, but it still kind of baffles me why the legislature decided to get rid of the facility registration requirement.
Was that the legislature or sunset?
Well, same difference. I mean, even if sunset recommended it, the legislature passed the bill that changed it. Because with that, we had a jurisdictional hook on the non-licensee owners, by virtue of the fact that if they had a clinic, a facility that was required to be registered, we had jurisdiction over them. That went away. Kind of bounced this around in my head a few times over the last couple of years, that by thinking, well, I don't know, maybe there's a way in which we could assert jurisdiction even now, simply by the fact that they are participating in the provision of chiropractic services. I'm not too keen on trying that as a rule, simply because the legislature spoke on the subject. I know in the past, like certainly during last session, I think both Patrick and I had some conversations with some legislative offices that kind of went, why did you do this? And frankly, we get asked this question all the time. Why don't you regulate facilities? And like, legislature said we can't anymore. So I don't know how much we can do. The one thing that we did do in the documentation and record keeping rules was that we've clearly said that the board asserts jurisdiction over non-licensees when it comes to patient records. If you are taking on patient records, we're saying that you are agreeing to our jurisdiction for that purpose. For other things, I don't know if we can do that. So that's kind of where we are.
Christopher, I know one of the big issues with facilities at the time was that that was not reflecting the current role that DCs play in the larger healthcare model as far as working in hospitals, working in multiple location clinics. The facilities thing was a bit of an outdated term, but the idea of having a license to participate in a chiropractic business or a certificate to where you are able to hire a chiropractor was something I was kind of batting around. And I'd love to get staff's opinion on if there is something we can do, a certification to be able to hire a chiropractor or a licensee. Because facilities I don't like, but I do like the idea of regulating the business owner.
I don't think we have the jurisdiction to do that without a legislative change.
Can we require that licensees can only work for a certified, someone who's taken a course in jurisprudence? I mean, just, is there a way that we can regulate who our licensees can work for, or does that violate right to work state issues?
That's one issue. Yeah, there's a lot of minefields in that.
I would be very open if the board or the staff had suggestions on ways that we could find a way to regulate bad practices that aren't owned by DCs, but I do not support going back to facility licenses because that's such a, this is a place versus it's a person who may travel around. It's just a little bit outdated on the current chiropractic model, in my opinion.
One thing I would like to say is at the franchise headquarters, particularly the Joint, they take it very serious about any doings of any clinic and our franchise. And I'm not, and they let me know in no uncertain terms that they have no qualms in disciplining those franchisees and even jerking their licensure if they are not meeting minimum standards. And so I don't know if there's a, pardon?
I was going to ask if our enforcement people are in touch with the Joint corporate to report these kind of complaints, because I have heard of them jerking facility licenses when they've gotten too many complaints.
And now that I have established relationships with these people, I believe I know the people to call, and I don't know that's within, being on the enforcement committee and fixing to be a franchisee, I don't know if that would be a conflict, and I'm sure Christopher would handle that. But I can tell you, after meeting the people that I met with, they will take this very serious, and their whole, and it was very important that they display to me that they want their perception from the board in Texas to be better. There was a bad, quote, as they said, a bad apple that was running the chiropractic, head of the chiropractic services, for no better words, the head DC, and he was fired. And then they hired a new gentleman a couple of years ago who's changing their standards of care. And they are taking it very, very serious. And I did express to them my personal concern about non-DC owned clinics. And they are very adamant about, if there are issues and if they know about it, they will take action. So maybe that's something that we can create for no better words, a dialogue with these specific people. And maybe that might be one way that we can attempt to help regulate as far as the minimum standards or, standards that we feel like need to be done by the doctors in Texas.
Just a second. Hang on just a second. I'm gonna make a comment, then I'm gonna call on Christopher and then Dr. White. But I was at the Sunset hearings and I sat right there below Chairman Gonzalez of Sunset, who said, as he was wrapping this up, he said, addressing TBCE, just because you don't register facility owners doesn't mean that you can't regulate them. And that's just been ringing in my ears ever since then. And there's something there. I certainly personally see no problem with us calling up corporate and expressing our opinions, just to open up a line of communication. Anyway, now let's go with the order that I just promised you, Christopher.
Well, normally I'm pretty inclined to say, well, let's push the envelope. On this, not so much, because there's a lot of things that come into play. Because not only we were talking about the facilities registration requirement going away, but also there was that change in the business organizations code, and which is something we have nothing to say. So my fear would be if we, decided to try and assert jurisdiction through rule or whatever, just through enforcement action, we're going to get mired pretty quickly into maybe some legal issues that we don't want to. I don't know. I suppose we could always ask, the board could decide to ask the question of the Attorney General's office and AG opinion, whether or not we could do that. And granted, Attorney General's opinions are not binding on the courts or anything, but they may not be the ultimate authority, but there's some authority. So that might be something we could look at.
Okay, I'm going to call on Dr. White and then Patrick.
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. Just let me say, as my own experience, 32 years ago when I was a new graduate, I went to work I was the first field doctor for a brand new franchise. I found that experience to be wonderful. It was the best thing I could have done right out of chiropractic college. With this current climate that we see, both unemployment as well as very high student loans, going out into private practice is very intimidating and can lead to failure right off the bat. I think what we need to do is, and perhaps we could do this even in our TBCE required board hours, is we need to emphasize the fact that each chiropractor, regardless of if they work for themselves, if they work for another chiropractor, if they work for a franchise, they are still going to be held accountable for standards and practices in their name, because many things will be done in their name. And so I think if we can give more of an admonition to our continuing education licensees that they are responsible for what goes out of that office with their name on it, relative to billing, relative to the other things that they do. And I think it's important for we veteran chiropractors to never look at these other chiropractors that work for a franchise as anything less than an equal chiropractor. Simply because you don't own your office does not mean you are even less of a chiropractor. And there can be some great advantages to working for someone else who's honest and ethical. So I think we could look at that from the franchise standpoint, but we also need to admonish the licensees who work for these franchises. They need to be vigilant. They need to be keeping their eyes open. They cannot just go in there with blinders on and just give adjustments, and that's all they have to do that day. So I think we need to enforce the responsibility for the individual chiropractor as well as for the clinic owner.
Thank you, Dr. White. Patrick.
My one quick point was also related to a particular chain. I know that we have had complaints in the past where a non-DC owner, a complaint from a DC that they felt like they were being pressured by their non-DC owner to cut corners. I will say when I have reached out to that particular chain, they have bent over backwards to try to fix those issues as they go. All that being said, obviously, we will have to remain vigilant, obviously, not just with chains, but with all DCs within our jurisdiction. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, Dr. Bronson, is I do know that there is one of our attendees who has raised their hand.
Oh, great. Let's, if y'all don't mind, let's do that, and we'll try to wrap up this discussion topic here in just a minute. Let me find.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to quickly state from my earlier, just to expound on my earlier statement, I know that not all franchises are high volume and a lower quality of service. I know there are some franchises that do very, very in-depth full service work as well.
Thank you, sir. I'm well aware of that. There was a particular chain that I had in mind. I just didn't mention the name. Here's Michelle Quattlebaum. Let's see. You are self-muted, ma'am. Go ahead and unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I do have a few comments, and not about, I know that the conversation kind of went off on a particular chain, and I'm not talking really about chains as much as the comments that were being made about not having facility registrations and any control over non-licensed owners. I was very vocal back when Sunset was in. All the lawyers were against that change because we felt that the registration was very important to keep control. I spent last night listening to a young DC, sobbing on the telephone because her owners who were absent, she was running the clinic, were wanting her to do illegal things. She quit immediately. So now, despite all of this unemployment, she had the ethics to say, I'm not going to do this. Here's my resignation. And that, unfortunately, is something we see. And I am not talking about that franchise because full disclosure, I do represent them. But that I'm not, because I think that the ones that y'all been talking about really do kind of keep an eye on their franchise owners. What I see are these owners who maybe have criminal records, who have been guilty of insurance fraud in the past and all, and they're hiring these young doctors out of school and having them do illegal activities. And that is something, and that's still a very frustrating thing for us, is that there's no control over that. And sometimes it's not that they're intentionally doing illegal activities. And I am not talking again about that chain you're talking about. I'm talking about other businesses. But I think they don't know. And I love the suggestion I think Dr. Baucom had. Y'all said maybe jurisprudence exam. I would even put it in, and of course, again, maybe I'm biased about the board rules and having them trained. I see a lot of these owners don't understand the rules. They don't understand Medicare rules. They don't understand billing guideline rules. And it's frustrating because these young doctors get out and they're trying to follow the rules and their bosses are saying no. And I think some of it's from not knowing the rules. And I don't know if that would be, a suggestion I would have, is to somehow have a situation where if you're going to own and hire chiropractors, they should have some evidence they know what the rules are, ethical rules, because that would solve. I think you could probably ask anyone who's been in enforcement over the years if a lot of these problems stem from a lack of knowledge of the rules. And I mean, that's my input, but I do, we see different, there's a whole lot of different concerns, and I see where Dr. Bronson's concern is and all, because, I see it on my end with what these doctors aren't doing. But I'm not talking about any chain or anything. But I see it, whether it's 2 or 3 clinics or one, and it's absentee owners that are not licensed, and and some of them are good. I'm not putting a whole umbrella over everything. It's the ones who don't know the rules that are the problems. Anyway, but that's my comment. Sorry. Thank you very much for letting me.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm gonna call on 2 board members and hopefully wrap up this discussion, unless there's an urgent need to discuss. I saw Dr. Wofford's hand first, and then Dr. Baucom's. We'll go in that order.
This is for Christopher. Is there a way, and I don't know in the way the rules would be written, that we could, if somebody has a criminal background and if they were a non-DC, could we prohibit them from owning a clinic if they have a criminal background? And I think I know the answer, which is probably we don't have the teeth to do that. But it just seems to reason if they have a criminal background, we should be able to have some kind of regulation over that. I'm just asking.
Particularly involving insurance fraud.
I'm sorry?
Well, again, the question boils down to, in that situation, about do we have any jurisdiction over that person? And I think the answer to that is it's not clear. And frankly, I think it leans towards saying we don't. But a way we could deal with that, kind of like what Dr. White was saying about it falls on the licensee. I suppose we could have a rule that would say if you're a licensee, you cannot be employed by someone who's had a has a conviction for it should be a narrow range of things, insurance fraud, that sort of thing, or something directly tied to the practice of chiropractic or the medical field in general.
I love that.
I think we could do that. I'm more comfortable with that being legally viable than I am for trying to go after the owners.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Christopher. Nick.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, Christopher, I really like that idea, but just going forward, maybe a couple things. So I bought a franchise. It's a local franchise. It's not a huge one, but that's how I got started too. Just so you know where I'm coming from. I think one of the ways that we could maybe get a feel of who's working for who and who owns clinics is the possibility of, on relicensure, just ask the question. Just how we do if you've been committed, if you've committed a crime or if anything's changed since the last relicensure, and then we can get an idea of who owns what. That might be an easy way to kind of get a list compiled of non-DC clinic owners. I don't know how I'm just throwing that out there. And, again, once we have that, I think we have to do something about criminal background checks on those owners as well, because I really like that idea. It just streamlines it. But again, coming from enforcement, if somebody's not reporting an offense, we can't investigate it. And that's just the way that we're set up. We're protecting the public, and we're not going to go, hunting for stuff. We don't have the manpower to do that, even if we wanted to. In the past as well, I've seen both sides of it, even within the same franchises, where 2 come to mind. We had one in Houston that just absolutely stonewalled us, and then we turned back around, same franchise, different franchise owner in Austin, and they bent over backwards for us a month later. There's just a lot of differentiation between how these folks operate, what they own. But that's all I got.
Can I make just a quick comment? Before we go too far into this, which I know we've already been in this quite a while, is there a way we can get a realistic picture of the scope of this issue? Can we get a report from enforcement at our next meeting as to what percentage of the complaints from the last year came from, multi-location franchises or from private practices? Because if there's a drastic difference, then we have to do something. But if we are perceiving a difference that may not be as drastic as we think, we should try to take that into account.
I like that idea, Dr. Henry, just to give us a perspective. So if that can be done, staff, please do that for us.
Yes, sir.
Okay, folks, thank you so much for the discussion. Let me make a quick look at our attendees and see if anybody has their hand raised. I don't want to skip over anybody. I see no more hands raised, fortunately. So let's move on to agenda item number 11, which involves requests to sit for the Texas jurisprudence examination. I call upon our Director of Licensing, Sarah Matthews, to lead this discussion. And then when a motion is made, I'll call for a second and the vote. Sarah?
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. Agenda item 11A is evaluation of criminal history request for Kurt Kangas. Applicant has a total of 5 arrests and 3 convictions or deferred sentences. Mr. Kangas is applying for a criminal history evaluation. Mr. Kangas is requesting the opportunity to enroll in a chiropractic college. And once a chiropractic degree is obtained, be given the opportunity to apply for a chiropractic license in Texas. The staff recommendation is to allow the applicant to enroll in a chiropractic college, and once a degree is obtained, applicant shall be able to apply for a Texas chiropractic license and sit for the Texas jurisprudence exam. This approval would be contingent on any future events and is only based on the facts that we have at this time. I'm unsure if he's on the call.
Let me see if I can find that out for you. Yes, he's on the call. I'm going to unmute Kurt Kangas and to ask him if he would like to address the board. And Kurt Kangas, you are self-muted, and now you are live. So please address the board with what you might have to say.
Hello, Dr. Bronson and the board and the staff. I'm grateful to be here, and I hope everything goes well. I would be honored to be able to practice chiropractic, and I've already started school and I've prepared and did all the prerequisites. I'm already at Parker University, and I'm supposed to matriculate in May if all goes well. I would love the opportunity to heal and be a part of the profession. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any board members have questions?
Thank you.
My only question was on the last incident in 2019, fairly recently. I read your letter there, and it had there was a throwing of a Coca-Cola, and then it said you spent 5 days in jail. Is that accurate? Am I interpreting that and reading that correctly?
That is correct. Yes, it was a sentence of 72 hours basically to sit to sit it out in jail. But it ended up taking about a week to basically get out of there.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a 72 hour instead of paying the ticket off.
Okay, that just sounded like a pretty aggressive punishment for what sounded like at least from your description of it, a less severe crime there. So I was just curious because that, obviously we look at length of time since last offense as a big consideration on these kind of things.
Right.
So if the board was to grant you the ability to sit, there would obviously have to be 0 more issues between now and your application for licensure.
Definitely. I completely understand.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no further discussion, the chair would entertain a motion.
So moved, Dr. Baucom.
Yeah, I'd second that. So move to sit to allow him to, how do you phrase that when it's someone who's looking for an evaluation?
I would
Um,
move that we accept the recommendation from staff.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Motion's been made by Dr. Baucom to accept the recommendation for staff in the matter of Kurt Kangas, and seconded by Dr. Henry. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay?
Nay.
I did hear one nay. I believe that was Ms. Ebony Todd, correct?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I hear one nay, and so the motion carries to accept. Sarah?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Agenda item. Oh, sorry.
Before you do that, I just wanted to congratulate Kurt Kangas for achieving this milestone in your life, and wish you the best, and challenge you to walk the straight line and be a forthright, respectable doctor of chiropractic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So agenda item 11B is also an evaluation of criminal history requests for an Evan Hall. Applicant has a total of 2 arrests and 2 convictions or deferred sentences. Mr. Hall is applying for a criminal history evaluation. He is requesting the opportunity to enroll in a chiropractic college, and once a chiropractic degree is obtained, be given the opportunity to apply for a chiropractic license in Texas. And the staff recommendation on this one is to allow the applicant to enroll in a chiropractic college. And once a degree is obtained, applicant shall be able to apply for a Texas chiropractic license and sit for the JP exam. This approval would be contingent on any future events and is only based on the facts that we have at this time.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
I wanted to just point out for Mr. Hall that while you had some very serious crimes that you were convicted of in the past, you know, the work you've done since then has been admirable, based on what I'm reading from your application here. So I would support him in being able to sit for the jurisprudence exam upon his graduation from chiropractic school.
I'd like to just bring up, I have a little bit more concern with this just because they're felonies. And
serious ones, yeah.
Yeah, that holds a little bit more weight for me. I understand the addiction thing, and you know, going through the rehabilitation process post. It's still recent enough that, I mean, what does it say? Community supervision expired 3 months ago, 4 months ago.
He was released early from what I read because of his rehabilitation efforts.
Is he with us?
Let me take a look. Excuse me just a second. Yes, and he has his hand raised. Would you like to hear from him now?
Sure.
Hi, I just want to thank you for giving me the time today. I'm here for any questions you have.
I guess my first, are you currently enrolled in chiropractic school?
I was accepted to Parker and my start date is May 3rd if I get the approval from y'all today.
Dr. Baucom, if it helps, I can just explain my thought process on this, which was that at 23 and 29, there's a lot of frontal lobe development that happens. Based on the letters we've received, there has been a lot of rehabilitative efforts that have gone into the last 5 years since the last conviction. So when he graduates, it'll be 8 years since his last issue with the law. So for me, I'm comfortable, but I understand that everyone has to be comfortable with this on their own.
Ms. Todd, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I'll speak up this time. For me, because the felonies are related to the drug use, is that correct? Am I reading that correctly, everyone?
That was my interpretation. Yeah.
My interpretation is it's related to the drug use. And it seems like his drug use could have amounted to such a life-altering, it had such a life-altering result that it appears that this man has completely turned his life around based upon what's in this packet. I feel like there's been enough time, and I'm glad to see that he takes full responsibility. That makes me very happy inside. What I don't like is, or what I have a hard time with is people that make me feel like it wasn't my fault a lot, and they don't just accept the responsibility and say, that's not who I am and I won't do that again. And this person makes me feel very comfortable that he has accepted who he was and he is no longer that person. And for that, I have extreme respect for him and support him 100%.
And may I also say, we also have evidence that he's not that person anymore from all the letters that have been written and his previous graduation and his GPA. So I would concur with what Ms. Todd said, Dr. Todd said.
Okay, so do I hear a motion to accept to the allowance of Evan Hall to attend chiropractic college and then subsequently sit for jurisprudence?
I'd like to make a motion.
Whether that's Ms. Todd or Dr. White.
Please allow me the honor of making the motion for the future Dr. Hall.
I will. The motion has been made by Ebony Todd and seconded by Dr. Deborah White. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Congratulations to Evan Hall and wish you well in school.
Thank you so much.
Enforcement matters. Discussion. This is agenda item number 12, folks. Discussion and possible action on proposed cease and desist orders pursuant to Texas Occupations Code 201.6015 and Texas Government Code 2001.056. We have one case, the case of Rodney Martin Matichik, I think, unlicensed, TBCE case number 2019-310, and I call upon either Christopher or Joseph.
Can everyone hear me?
Joseph McLaughlin, yes.
Okay. Dr. Bronson, we need to go ahead and table this item until the next board meeting so we can go ahead and move on to agenda item 13.
Thank you. The agenda item 12 is tabled at the discretion of the chair. Agenda item 13 is discussion and possible action on proposed agreed orders pursuant to Texas Occupation Code 201.504A1. And we have 9, I think, for this meeting. Joe, I'll announce you. I would like for you to actually announce each individual item to the board and present the issues, and then the board members can discuss each individually and vote, and then you can announce the next one. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. Board members will start with agenda item 13A, the matter of Jade Malay, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 6310. This includes TBCE cases, case numbers 2018-180 and 2018-195. The case involved a series of advertisements for services outside the scope of practice. staff was able to reach an agreement with respondent's legal counsel for respondent to resolve both cases by paying an administrative penalty of $2,000 to the board. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved.
Wofford second.
Who made the motion?
Henry.
Dr. Henry made the motion and Dr. Wofford seconded. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Motion carries.
Agenda item 13B, the matter of Chad Everett Glines, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 10536. This includes TBCE case number 2020-003. The case involved a failure to properly assess and evaluate a patient. Staff was able to reach a agreed resolution with legal counsel for respondent, for the respondent to pay a financial penalty of $1,000 to the board and to take and pass the board's jurisprudence examination. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved, Wofford.
Wofford made a motion. Do I hear a second?
Dr. Neal is trying to second, but I can't hear her.
Let's see, Dr. Neal. I want to make sure we can hear you. Are you self-muted? Make sure I don't have you muted. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Neal. No, you can speak. I see your hand, but I'm not always looking at the pictures. No, let's see.
The go to meeting says you're not muted. The fact that you are muted tells me it's something with your computer or local setup as opposed to go to meeting.
Meanwhile, I'm going to accept Dr. Neal's hand signal that she seconded the motion. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Joe, can I ask a quick question? Have the cases that these agreed orders are based on been reviewed by the enforcement committee, or is this stuff that staff has done outside enforcement?
All of these cases have been reviewed by the enforcement committee previously.
So that the records and things have been looked at. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on to agenda item 13C, the matter of Arthur Boyd Bradley, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 11059. This includes TBCE case numbers 2020-045 and 2020-093. The cases involved a lack of diligence in failing to protect a patient's dignity. The staff was able to reach a agreed resolution with legal counsel for respondent to require respondent to take and pass the Ethics and Boundaries Assessment Services examination, or as we all know, commonly referred to as EBAS, within 90 days of approval of the agreed order. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved. Dr. Henry.
Dr. Henry made the motion.
Wofford second.
Dr. Wofford seconded. I have a question. That's the entire EBAS test, not just a section of it?
Yes, sir, the entire EBAS.
Okay, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries.
And Dr. Neal's voice is back.
Hey, hi, Dr. Neal.
Moving on to agenda item 13D, matter of Douglas Lee Nelson, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 5180, including TBCE case number 2018-191. Case involved a failure to timely provide patient records. Staff was able to reach a agreed resolution with respondent for respondent to pay a financial penalty of $500 to the board. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved, Dr. Henry.
Second.
Sorry.
Motion was made by Dr. Henry. I think it was seconded by Dr. White. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Dr. Bronson, regarding agenda item 13E, this particular agenda item actually ended up being closed, I believe, as a no violation after staff and further EC review. So there isn't actually any agreed order to discuss for this particular case. So I'll go ahead and just move on to agenda item 13F.
Yes, sir.
This agenda item is the matter of Michael T. Reed, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 9424, regarding TBCE case number 2020-144. Case involved a complaint regarding advertising superiority. The staff was able to reach a agreed resolution with respondent to pay a financial penalty of $500 to the board. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved, Henry.
Second, Wofford.
Motion's been made by Henry, seconded by Wofford. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Takes us to agenda item 13G, the matter of Gerald Zachary Parker, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 10766, regarding TBCE case number 2019-041. Case involved respondent practicing with an expired license for a period of time longer than our previously established window of 90 days, wherein the board's directive is for staff not to take disciplinary action except for requiring the the late applicant to pay the statutorily established late fee. So obviously, as you can see in this case, the license is expired for a greater period of time than that. So staff was able to reach a agreed resolution with respondent for respondent to pay a penalty of $1,000 to the board. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved.
So moved. I'll second. Wofford, second.
Motion was made by Balcom, seconded by Wofford. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Moving on to agenda item number 13H, the matter of Nathaniel Eli Pochucha, Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 10938, regarding TBCE case number 2019-096. Case involved standard of care findings that respondent violated the board's rule regarding required contents of patient records. Staff was able to reach an agreed resolution with respondent to pay a financial penalty of $1,000 to the board. The staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
So moved, Dr. Henry.
I'll second it. Ebony Todd.
Motion's been made by Henry, seconded by Todd. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Taking us to our final enforcement agenda item for today, agenda item number 13I, the matter of Ralph D. Stokes Jr., Doctor of Chiropractic, license number 6487, regarding TBCE case numbers 2020-049 and 2020-097. Case involved complaints against respondent of unprofessional conduct and a lack of diligence in impairing patient's dignity. Staff was able to reach a resolution with respondent to pay a financial penalty of $2,000 to the board and to take and pass the EBAS examination the 90 days of the approval date of the agreed order, and finally to place respondent's license on probation for 1 year and require respondent to not have any more complaints or allegations of a similar pattern as was indicated in the complaints filed against him. Staff recommendation is that the board accept the agreed order.
Moved.
Motion made. Sorry.
I believe Dr. Neal made the motion. Do I hear a second? Or did I hear a second? I think so.
Second, Dr. Baucom.
Baucom seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Joe, is that it for this item?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's it for enforcement items for this meeting. So that takes us to agenda item 14, and I'll go ahead and let you announce and then defer to Christopher for rulemaking.
I will. Let me just check and see if any board members need to take a break or if you want to plug on through. You'd like to take a 10-minute break? Okay, so it is 11:27 a.m. and I'm calling a 10-minute break to return at, let's say, 11:40. Meanwhile, board members, please no discussions regarding any board matters, and I'll see you all at exactly 11:40 a.m. Am I on? Okay, it's 11:40 a.m. The Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners will now reconvene in open session.
Dr. Bronson, we do have a quorum with 5 members that are logged in and visible on screen.
Thank you. Yeah, if I can only find how to navigate my own screen to get back to my agenda. What in the world?
I'm present as well, Mr. Fortner. I don't know why I'm not visible on screen, but I wanted to be clear that I'm here.
Okay, here we go. I do that. I will click on something and then I can't find my way back, but I did. So here we go. We are now under the section of rules for adoption. So agenda items 14 through 18 call for discussion and possible action on rules up for adoption. I'll read each item individually as it is listed and then ask our general counsel, Christopher Burnett, to begin the discussion of each by sharing the details and his advice. And then I'll entertain any motions to act upon, and I'll call for a vote before moving to the next item. So agenda item number 14 is discussion and possible action on adopting a new rule relating to substance abuse testing and monitoring. 22 TAC 74.1, substance abuse testing and monitoring of applicants. Christopher.
Yes, Dr. Bronson. So the proposed 74.1 partnered up with 74.2. This would just put into rule what the board's practice has been for substance abuse monitoring of applicants in the case of 74.1. We received 2 comments. One was from Dr. Tays. I think that was forwarded to y'all in the board materials. And she had 2 points. One I'm going to have to disagree with about the structure of the language. We're following the traditional drafting practice of whoever is doing the action. It's a board shall sort of language. The second one that she had in there was that in subsection F, we have it in the proposed language that we would not do an applicant under probation for monitoring, testing and monitoring for more than 2 years. Her suggestion is that it should be longer. So that's up to you. I would say this: my sneaking suspicion is that these 2 rules are going to be the next ones. We're going to actually have the regulatory compliance division at the governor's office actually say something about, which is no big deal. But I just wanted to put that out there. My recommendation is for y'all to adopt the rule as proposed, with any changes having to do with the length of time for probation, the probationary period that you deem wise.
Is there any harm in, not saying that we should be monitoring someone for 5 years, but giving us the ability to, where otherwise we might not be comfortable, approving licensure, but with that?
Well, and here's the thing about this. So this is for applicants. What we're saying is that, you're going to be, I can't imagine we're going to have somebody that applies for a license and then you all go ahead and agree to the testing and license is granted. So at that point, they're actually a licensee. It's just how they kind of came about falling under the testing and monitoring regime is a little bit different than a current licensee. I don't think it really matters. I think I understand her point about that you might have some individual that was the possibility is that a longer period of time might be necessary.
Yeah, I'd like to, just suggest that non-substantial change and make that 5 years versus 2. So I'm going to go ahead and move that we adopt this rule with the non-substantive change of extending that maximum probationary period from 2 years to 5.
I'll second.
Ms. Todd, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. I have a question. What I'm looking at looks nothing like what we normally are looking at for rules. Am I looking at the right thing?
It's a different format, yeah.
A different format, okay. So at 17, or for 74.1, what I read said 5 years with the underlines. Is that am I reading the wrong part? But where are y'all? I might be at the wrong part because it's formatted differently, and I was
I was reading Dr. Tays' comments, but here we go. The board may not place an applicant under probation. So item F, the board may not place an applicant under probation for substance abuse testing and monitoring for more than 5 years from the date of the board issues an applicant's probation
item
license.
F.
Yeah.
So item A says 5 years for the licensee to undergo.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are two different time limits in this.
Right, the 5 years is for some offense that happened within 5 years before the date of application. What we're talking about in F is how long we could put them on probation and require testing and monitoring.
And my thought process on that again is really just that, not that we should be doing it for 5 years, but that if there's someone who we might not be comfortable sitting, but that's going to let them get sit for a license, then I would think that us having some leeway is a great idea. And I think Dr. Tays made a good point to that.
I'd like to make a brief comment on the comment that was made by the individual. I don't know if it's appropriate to say their names, but the individual who sent Mr. Burnett the email, or whomever, the email
I don't think
about.
we even had a name for her. Just the first name is all I saw on that email.
Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir. She appears to be highly offended by this rule, and so one of the things I just wanted to put out in the atmosphere is, even in my profession, illnesses can result in you not being able to competently do your job. And so her stance appears to be, because it's an illness, it should be treated and you should not face losing your job. And I just wanted to put it out there that there are times in life, in pretty much any profession, that an illness may result in the loss of competency or the loss of the correct judgment needed in order to properly act on and perform. And so I just wanted to give that bit of encouragement just in case she's listening, because I could tell by the language that she was highly offended by this, and I hope that helps a little bit with her offense level.
And I'd like to point out that this rule should allow us to let these people get back to work faster. So that instead of us just having to depend on, well, I hope they're better, it actually allows us to let them get back to work under a probationary period. So this is no way trying to criminalize something or persecute anyone. It's really an effort to protect the public and allow people to work.
That too.
Yeah, I agree with y'all, and especially Ms. Todd on this. It's public protection. That's our job, and there's nothing criminal about it. This is occupation code. It's not the penal code. Our job is to protect patients, and this helps us do it.
So there's a motion on the table. Was there a second?
I'll second it.
I think Dr. Neal had already seconded. And so let's stick with that. Motion was made by Dr. Henry, correct?
Correct.
And seconded by Dr. Neal, and we've had some discussion. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All in favor of the adoption of this rule, substance abuse testing and monitoring of applicants, TAC 74.1, amended to strike 2 years and replace that with 5 years, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. The next item is 15, discussion and possible action on adopting a new rule relating to substance abuse testing and monitoring, and this would be Rule 74.2. Christopher.
Okay, so this is the substance abuse testing and monitoring rule for current licensees. Slightly different, minimally different. And 74.1, I would point out that this rule is statutorily required. We are required by Chapter 201 to have some sort of monitoring rule. This is it. We received one comment. It was the same comment from that individual who commented on 74.1. Recommendation is that you adopt the rule without changes. That's it.
I think that the same non-substantive change would make sense here of extending that probationary period maximum to 5 years from 2. So
We
item
don't.
F.
We don't. There isn't a time limit on.
Board may. I'm sorry. Am I reading the right item? Oh, I'm 74.1. My mistake.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
So moved. I'll second it.
Okay, I think it was Baca made the motion and Todd seconded. And this would be to adopt new rule 74.2. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda item 16 is discussion and possible action on adopting a new rule relating to business practices. 22 Texas Administrative Code 75.9, closing a practice. Christopher?
Yes, this is kind of our checklist recommendation rule to licensees that are thinking about shutting down their practice. We received no comments on this proposed rule. I think I mentioned in the board materials that I've got an incorrect section title that's going to be fixed. Recommendation is that y'all adopt the rule as written without changes.
I have a question for you, Mr. Burnett.
Yes, ma'am.
The communication that's being considered in A2 with the patients, should it be in writing, or is that not? Because I noticed that A6 said writing, but there was no requirement for the notification or communication to be in writing for their patients. And I just thought, you know, if I were them, I would want some sort of proof, like, yes, I did tell you, you know, not just a phone call. But I don't,
there's nothing in this rule that's mandatory. This is kind of an oddball that says that they have to do this. This is a little bit of a suggestion checklist.
oh, okay.
So
okay.
It's up to them whether or not they're going to do this. The reason that this rule came about was that we are, especially since COVID hit, we are constantly peppered with questions about what do I have to do in order to close down my practice. And because practices vary so greatly, and there's a big difference between rural and urban, this is just kind of a general list of what we think a licensee ought to do. And frankly, we really don't have any way to enforce this if we made it mandatory, because if they're no longer licensed, if they quit the game, we really don't have anything to hold over them. So that's why this is just recommendations. That's why the language is should as opposed to shall.
Right, and modify or eliminate, they can modify or eliminate the steps as well.
Yeah, this was hard because of the financial burden some of these steps could place on a practice already going under. So we tried to make it with a soft hand of guidance.
Yes. Well, writing can be an email, so I don't mean to do, you know.
Yeah.
Or even a public written statement on a website could somehow do that.
And we tell them that when we get asked this question. I mean, literally, this is pretty much what Joe and I tell them when somebody calls. This is what we think you ought to do. And it just got to the point that we were constantly fielding these questions. And it's like, well, do you have anything in your rules that says, well, what we ought to do? Well, I finally said, okay, we're going to have a rule. So this is what I came up with.
Well, I like it, and I'll make the motion to adopt the rule as written.
Thank you, Ms. Todd. Motion's been made by Todd and seconded by Henry. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. Item number 17 on the agenda is discussion and possible action on adopting a new rule relating to scope of practice, 22 TAC 78.10, prohibitions on animal chiropractic. Christopher.
Yes, I think this is, we could call this the Dr. Neal rule. This is another oddball one, in that you all have no jurisdiction over animal chiropractic. So what this rule is doing is it's simply the board making an affirmative statement that yes, animal chiropractic is not within scope. But if you do this and you do it in compliance with the vet board's rules, the board's not going to ding you for offering services outside of scope. And furthermore, you can advertise without getting in trouble as well. So it's kind of an exception there. We did get several comments. I don't know if you all had an opportunity to take a look at those. I would characterize them as being thoughtful. However, there seems to be, and I understand not everybody's a lawyer, misunderstanding that the board cannot expand the scope of practice on its own. And that's what some of the commentators were suggesting be done to include animals. Well, that would require a statutory change, and we don't have the power to do that. And then questions about, what kind of requirements should we impose requirements on our licensees to be able to do animal chiropractic? And the answer to that is we don't have the authority to do that. That would have to be, again, the vet board. So my recommendation is to adopt the rule as written without changes.
I have a question, just for, it's fine, written the way that it is, in my opinion. I just wonder, is for me to be able to wrap this in my head, wrap around this. Okay, is this sort of like an OBGYN also practicing as a foot doctor, and it's like if they had licenses that were different, that the OBGYN licensing would not get involved with the foot doctoring that they're doing, and they're like, you can take that up with the foot doctor people, like, we don't care. Is that what we're doing here? That might be a terrible example, but I'm trying to like wrap my mind around how it's written. I'm like, oh, so it's like, you can do it. We don't have anything to do with that. Like, that's
No,
all.
no, I think that's exactly right. We don't have anything to do.
Okay. We didn't tell you to do it, but.
If the foot doctor board had rules that allowed that, we would just say we're staying out of it. So
Right, that's how I feel like, that's a terrible example I gave folks, I know, but on the spot, I'm trying to figure out two examples.
well, the big thing on this is that the way our advertising rule works is that by using the term chiropractor or chiropractic, you're kind of invoking your license at that point. And so all of a sudden you were practicing outside of scope, and it was just a big problem we've had for a long time. So by carving out and saying that as long as you're following those other rules, then you're not violating our advertising rule. That's the biggest takeaway for this. If Mindy Neal can definitely elaborate on that. This has been a baby of hers.
Thank you so much.
I would think that this might be grounds for a huge celebration too among chiropractors who perform animal chiropractic. So it's removing a huge burden of possible sanctions. And so anyway, Dr. Neal, thank you so much for your insights and sharing your insights and helping to craft this rule.
You're most welcome always.
And
I have a question.
Go ahead,
Scott.
Do we have, which number one, I want to applaud Dr. Neal for what she did, but going to a lot of events, I've seen people that advertise they're animal chiropractors without any degree. Can they say that they are a chiropractor? Do we have any teeth for these people that have no formal training that are saying that they are a chiropractor?
Not really.
That's the beef I have. And Dr. Neal will agree with me. That happens a lot. People have zero training in anything, yet they use the word chiro, that they are animal chiropractors.
The problem we run into is that statutorily, the practice of chiropractic is limited to human beings. So if somebody says they're an animal chiropractor, okay, you're dealing with animals. That's not chiropractic. That's not something under our jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But they say that they are a chiropractor, though.
Sounds like, well, there's
but they're an animal chiropractor,
right? Which all of a sudden is a differentiator. But the vet board ought to have something to say about that.
See, that's where the teeth line is in the vet board.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, I think I disagree with a couple of you. I would think that if someone was out there at an event practicing animal chiropractic, which is fine, that's under the purview of the vet board. But if they say that they are a chiropractor, that comes under our jurisdiction.
But
that's
not
correct.
an animal chiropractor.
Amen.
An animal chiropractor is just like the whole, our services are not, there's overlap. So a veterinarian can practice animal chiropractic if they want to.
I understand, Dr. Henry, but these are people that have no training, and they're using the word chiropractor.
I get it. I just, after looking at these rules in depth, including our advertising rules, the problem we run into is that we don't regulate anything to do with animal chiropractic. All this rule is doing is saying that our licensees, so we're not regulating anyone else. We're just saying that our licensees, the people we do regulate, are not violating one of our rules. The vet board really should probably get involved in something like that, especially someone with zero license. But we don't own animal chiropractic, unfortunately.
Well, there's two issues here. One, and I certainly agree with that, Dr. Henry, that I would encourage the vet board to consider this issue. But just to be clear on what I said a minute ago, a veterinarian can practice animal chiropractic, but a veterinarian cannot say that they are a chiropractor.
Can they say they're an animal chiropractor?
Yep.
I think so, yes.
No, they do not. They say they are certified in animal chiropractic.
I'm just saying that we couldn't enforce that. They could call themselves a animal chiropractor. You're right. They cannot say that they are a chiropractor.
I don't know. I don't think that they can say that they're an animal chiropractor, because I don't think that there is any such a thing that is defined in statute. That is not a licensed provider.
I think the vet board
Exactly. That's the
allows it.
problem.
Dr. Neal?
It's not a regulated matter.
Dr. Neal?
Dr. Bronson, you're absolutely right. They can't call themselves an animal chiropractor. They can inform their clients that they have been certified in animal chiropractic.
Yes.
So
There's a big difference in labeling
there is a
yourself.
big difference.
Labeling yourself versus labeling the procedure that you're doing. That's the
Yes.
difference.
And there does need to be some cooperation in this, because it is kind of melding, into two different fields.
Yeah, so to address Dr. Wofford's concern, can they say that they're a chiropractor? I say absolutely not. That comes under our jurisdiction for anybody that says they're a chiropractor.
Yes.
Can they say that they're an animal chiropractor? I say that probably they can say that, but there's no such regulated thing.
No, they're still certified in animal chiropractic, or they
Can
are
and
not.
should are the differences here.
So
Should they?
would-
I don't.
So would we have jurisdiction over them, such as someone who was previous licensed and their license expired, so they're unlicensed? Would that be, like, could we actually enforce something on someone who is saying they're a chiropractor and they've never been licensed? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that if they're representing that they are a chiropractor, that's where we can get involved. If they say chiropractor, no matter what they're doing, that is holding themselves out to be a licensee of our board, just the way our rules are defined. So yes, if they say chiropractor, yes. If they say animal chiropractic, that's like a carve out where I don't know who regulates that. I don't think we do.
Well,
And
so if they say animal chiropractor, they're still using chiropractor, and it seems like that would still
But it's
raise.
not holding themselves out as a licensee of our board. I mean, and
Right.
that's the only reason. It's an advertising rule we have.
Okay. Well, I don't really care. I don't know why I'm talking.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people that care, and that's especially chiropractors who attend an event and go and see an unlicensed person performing chiropractic, and there's nothing we can do about that. But if that person has a business card and the business card says that they're an animal chiropractor, they're not licensed by us, they're not licensed by anybody, but their business card says that that's what they do. That's just that's an area that is just completely unregulated. Dr.
Well,
Neal?
hopefully they're working under a vet's supervision if they're following vet board rules.
Right.
Yeah. And see, they can, if they're a lay person, they don't have anything to hold over themselves. I mean, they don't have a license in either field. But if they're doing a procedure to an animal, that falls under the vet boards practicing veterinary medicine without a license.
And if they hurt something, it's property damage too. I mean, they're open to
Exactly.
lawsuits and everything else if you hurt an animal.
So the vet board has a stake in this, as well as if they're using chiropractor in there, we have a stake in it.
The only way I think to get to solve the problem that Dr. Bronson raises would be if the vet board had a rule that said you can only call yourself an animal chiropractor if you meet whatever their definition of that term is. They have not defined that. Yeah, their rule, such as it is pretty old.
I would suggest
not
that
very complete.
The Texas chiropractic lobby who's involved in this should absolutely start talking to the vet board about this issue, because I think now that we've said it's okay from our end, but I think the vet board has a lot of room to really regulate this if we want to, or if they want to.
They do, and if they had like a standard of care established, like, and I'm just going to use mine for example, an AVCA certification. There's others out there, but that they have a standard, they take a unbiased testing, situation and get everybody kind of on the same playing field.
Short of major statutory rule change, our board's not going to have a role in this in the future. So this is really a vet board rule that could be changed very easily. I say easily, it could be changed with a persuasive argument to the vet board, I believe, at this point. So on this rule, Dr. Neal, I think we're waiting for a motion to adopt. If you would like to have the honors.
I would like to make the motion.
And I second it.
So Dr. Neal, you made a motion to adopt Rule 7810 and seconded by Ebony Todd. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Congratulations, Dr. Neal.
Dr. Bronson, if I may let the record reflect that I love animals, and I didn't mean like I don't care about the animals. I was like, that came out totally wrong. But I don't want any animals to be abused in the making of this chiropractic journey. Okay, I'm done.
Your statement was recorded, and I'm not sure if it's going to be in the record, but it is available for any concerned parties.
Miss Todd loves animals. Got it.
Item number 18, agenda item 18, discussion and possible action on adopting the repeal and replacement of certain rules relating to complaints, 22 TAC 80.4, schedule of penalties. Christopher?
Yeah, this is simply the update to our schedule of penalties that we had to do after all our massive rule changes. It's kind of expanded, a little bit more user friendly, and we broke things down in categories. We received no comments on this. I want to thank all mentioned help got on this from Norma and James and Joe. So I think it's pretty good right now. So recommend that you vote to adopt with no changes.
Just to point out, this is the rule that's also going to make it possible for people who have forget to renew their license on time, not have something reported to the national boards, which can cause all kinds of problems. This is a good rule, in my opinion. So I would move that we adopt as written.
And I will second that motion.
Motion's been made by Dr. Henry and seconded by Ms. Todd. To clarify, Dr. Henry, you said reporting to the national board. I know that you meant the SINBAD, the national database.
Thank you. Yeah.
No worries. So all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Concluding matters, agenda item number 19. Do any of you honorable board members have a request for a future agenda item? Ebony Todd.
Dr. Bronson, a meeting or two ago, I offered to draft an article for using my experience as a special victims counselor and a victims advocate, essentially, to encourage or at least enlighten some of our chiropractors about victims of sexual assault and how they can interact with them. I would like to, I guess, I don't know if it's appropriate for it to become an agenda item, but I would like to share the article with the board members for review before it is, before I solicit it being published. And so I thought I would ask for it to be added to the next agenda, if that would please.
That it would please me, and I'm sure the rest of the board, to have this as a discussion item in the next board meeting. Is that would that suffice?
Yes, absolutely. And I will be sure to email it out well before the board meeting.
Okay, thank you. We'll make certain that
as you're writing this, is this going to reflect like how to interact with those types of victims? Because we're a hands-on profession, and so that would be helpful. I know that I've had patients in there that are concerned about that, and so any advice in that department's always going to be helpful.
Absolutely. Well, oddly enough, my initial advice is to treat every patient as if they're a victim of sexual assault and rape, because you don't know who it is. But I am going to, basically this is preventative law. It's intended to be a preventative law resource that, you know, if you do these things, you're less likely to be falsely accused of it.
Yeah. Anything we can do to make our patients feel more comfortable and in clear
Absolutely.
communication, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think it's an outstanding topic as a discussion item for the next board meeting.
And Dr. Brunson, I know we already requested from staff, but if it is possible, I would like to get an idea on how large of an issue this is on the large or the multi-clinic facilities and the chain practices, you know, violation percentages. We talked about it earlier.
Yes, we did. What's appropriate regarding, you're just interested in some stats, right?
Yeah, I want to get a gauge on how big of an issue this is, because I know that it hits home to a lot of people, but I don't know if it's a just how big of an issue is before we go into really exploring, you know, do we need to try to bring back some sort of regulatory authority over this, or is this just a very visible issue that maybe isn't as huge as I think it might be?
For efficiency purposes, I would think that if the staff could just distribute the stats to us, if it doesn't need to be received in open meetings, then we can just receive that and then carry that wherever we want to in an open meeting.
Because then we can take action on those if it's warranted. That's a great idea.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Henry. Anybody else? Mr. Allen, it was good to see you.
I will defer to Mr. Burnett at this time. I have a question, but he does too.
Oh, it's actually not well, it is a question. I need to ask you for the next meeting, request one thing and then ask you about another one. The request is about time we do some ethics training, refresher training for you all. And that would be closed session. So wanted to see if you all would be okay with that for the next meeting. And then the question for you is also, would you like to have a acupuncture update from Karen Watkins? That would require also it being in closed session.
When is the next meeting? Is it already scheduled?
It is not, and that was what I was going to bring up.
Oh, okay.
If there are any conflicting dates in either the last 2 weeks of May or the first week of June, please get them to me and to Dr. Bronson as soon as possible, because we will need to go ahead and schedule that meeting. Now, I say that with the caveat that I suspect if things remain on their current trend, actually that kind of trend, that perhaps the emergency rule, the emergency declaration in place right now that allows us to have remote meetings will no longer be in effect, which means we will need to meet in person. I am operating under the assumption that that's the case, which means I'm going to need to schedule a location for us to have the next meeting.
I brought that up before we made a decision, Mr. Burnett, because I want to make sure that, you know, I absolutely will be there so that I wouldn't miss the ethics training. That's why I brought up the date. I didn't mean to stop us from.
Oh, not at all.
Perfect. So there will be a survey sent out, correct, Mr. Fortner, regarding.
Actually, if I could just, if members could just take a look at their personal and business calendars and send any conflict dates for the last 2 weeks of May, first week of June, and then we will
I have jury duty lined up on the 20th or the 17th through the 20th to be available that week. So if this can get me out of that, let's schedule it then. But seriously, I guess I have to.
You're
say that's
terrible,
probably
Dr.
not.
Henry, terrible.
I'm going, doing my duty. I'll do my duty. But the 20th is probably out for me. May 20th.
20th is the last day of school for us, so it would really be rough that week.
Yeah, y'all just go ahead and email that stuff to me, and we can definitely make those accommodations.
We're just looking at Thursdays, right?
That's generally when we've had them, but there's nothing in stone that says they have to be on a Thursday.
We can't
Okay.
ever.
We didn't hear you, Dr. White.
Still can't hear you.
Thursday is the only day I will be able to attend. And I would vote for the first week in June, frankly.
So she wants to make some decisions now, is what that means, Mr.
Yeah.
Ford.
All right. If you just email any conflicts that you might have or preferences to Patrick, then we will schedule up the next meeting. Any other discussion?
Dr. Bronson, do we need to have an agenda item in reference to our virtual meetings versus in-person meetings, since we're going to be having some information at that meeting about the cost of all this, or when are we going to decide, or how do we decide if we go with, virtual meetings all but once a year, or how is that decision made?
Well, Mr. Fortner is largely responsible for that since he's in charge of the budget. Go ahead, Mr. Fortner.
Well, and unless or until the legislature passes a bill that allows us to continue to meet remotely, we would not, unless it was under a gubernatorial proclamation of emergency.
Would we have any say in like petitioning them one way or another, or is that a thing?
I have reached out to some staff members that if we were asked to testify on the bill, that I would make it clear that as a small agency, those financial considerations for us are quite considerable. We have to very, very carefully parse our language to not make it sound as if we are testifying in favor of the bill, but we are just offering an impact statement of if that bill were to pass.
Is there such a bill out there now, or will someone have to bring that up?
There's at least 2 of them that I'm aware, but I think there's more than that.
Yeah.
I'm going to send you an update bill tracking report later, and I think it's up to about, I think there's 4 now.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure meeting with you today, and it is time for me to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion
Walker.
to adjourn.
Ebony Todd made the motion. Did I hear a second by Brandon Allen?
Yes, you did, Dr. Wilson.
Seconded by Brandon Allen. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? The time is 12:23 p.m. on March 11th, 2021, and we're adjourned.
Thank you. Y'all have a good one.
Bye, guys.